Welcome to Healing Generations, a podcast creating a dialogue uplifting the importance of healing, strengthening, and supporting our communities, and that addresses the disparities and inequities in communities of color. Healing Generations is brought to you by the Healing Generations Institute, a collaborative initiative of the National Compadres Network and the Brotherhood of Elders. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on our new releases.
Buenas, this is Cisco Gallardo with the Healing Generations podcast, Yelders edition from the National Compadres Network and the Brotherhood of Elders. I want to welcome everyone. Today, we have a special episode, one we normally don't do. Most of the time when I have a guest, normally I only have one guest at a time, but today we have three guests. And we're going to talk about this listening tour, the Healing Generations Institute, again, in conjunction with the Brotherhood of Elders and National Compadres Network. We set out to listen to the community and practitioners of circle keeping and the various ways that people hold space in schools and community and various things like that. But before we get into that, I want to remind everybody, I want you to share this podcast. If you like it and you get value from it, share it with your, with your friends and family, with your colleagues at work, with your children. We have many, many different episodes coming from different points of view. I want to remind everybody we have the youngsters that come out and they put stories out there for different reasons, highlighting different youth that are going through different things, that are on their own healing journey in a lot of ways. And then we have the maestras who talk about women's issues in various ways, everything from being a mom to just being that professional woman, or the woman learning about the healing ways, right? Learning about curanderismo, learning about folk healing, however that is, And then we have one by Maestro Jerry Teo, who really interviews a lot of practitioners from various fields, from, African-American elders from their perspective, Native elders talking about different things that are affecting their community, mental health, healing, all those different kinds of things. We do our best to try to capture as many stories that we can. And then we have this particular podcast where we talk about the issues facing the community, but from a Yelders perspective. Now, today we have some elders on here, and but the Yelder perspective is just that in-between group, those that are the kind of front line in a lot of different ways. We want to remember them and also bring those stories, to the community, to our listeners in various ways. But, every time I get started, I always do the 4 directions. And I want everyone, if you could close your eyes for a moment, if you can, and you're in a safe space, I want you to close your eyes and take a deep breath. And I want you to, in your mind, think of that east direction. I want you to think about our grandfathers and our fathers, our uncles, our tios. Think about our nephews, our sons, our coworkers, our friends, our homies. I want you to think about all the blessings that they bring, and the trauma too that they face, they're trying to overcome. I want you to think about all the men in your life that we're asking that spirit to be here with us. And then we're going to turn left. And as we're turning left to that west direction, we're thinking of all our LGBTQ plus relatives, especially during this month. If you're listening to this during that June time period, they're under assault in a lot of ways. We want to, think about them and acknowledge the struggles that they have and the beauty that they bring to our community. As we face that west direction, we think of all the women in our lives, our grandmothers, our mothers, our daughters, our tias, our hood tias. We want to think about, our nieces, our coworkers, the women in our community. We want to think about them, all the blessings that they bring, and all the trauma that they face too. We want them to show up wholeheartedly, the way they are, the way they love our community, the way they love us, and the struggles that they have. We want to recognize them and bring them into this discussion as we talk about the power of circle keepers. And then we turn around to that north direction and we think of our ancestors, And I mean everyone's ancestors. We want to think about all those ones that lived before us, trying to make our life a little bit better, and all the things that they endured for us. You know, first it might have been for themselves, but ultimately we're the ones who benefit from it. So we want to acknowledge them and remember the things that they did for us, you know, the sacrifices they made, you know, even the things they didn't do to give us that guide so we know what to do now. You know, we want to think of our grandparents. We want to think about our parents. Maybe your mom or dad is elderly. You know, maybe you still have your grandparents. You know, call them up, check up on them, see how they're doing. You know, when you encounter elders on the street, say hi to them. You know, acknowledge them. A lot of elders in our community are oftentimes feel forgotten, you know, and we want to make sure that we acknowledge them. And they might be elders in different ways. Not everyone's a spiritual elder. It could be elders of organizing, elders of education, elders of physical health. You know, there's different kinds of elders. We want to respect all of them and want good things for them. And then we're turning again to that self-direction, and we think about all our children, even those little babies that are not born yet. We want to think about them. We want to think about the newborns and the toddlers, you know, elementary school, middle school, high school, and beyond. We want to think about all our children and the intersection from the oldest all the way down. There's that spectrum from the oldest all the way down to the young, this intergenerational struggle for healing. That's what we want. I want to acknowledge the sun, the symbol of hope, and the sun is medicine. You know, we need it. It helps us stay positive. It helps us have energy and all these different kinds of things. But with like a lot of medicine, you know, you have to do it in proper doses and respect it, you know, in a lot of ways. But we want to remind ourselves of the sun. We want to remind ourselves of the earth, you know, our mother here. We want to think about her and do what we can to support, you know, a sustainable life, not only for us, but for the planet and all those that represent that. You know, we want to honor that in a good way. And then in the center, you know, whatever you believe, however you believe, I want you to remind yourself of that miracle of life that we all share. And that, you know, with the good times and the bad times, it's just that there's a miracle there every day, you know, and it always inspires me to try to do better. So I want you to close your eyes again and really take a deep breath. Palabra. I want to thank you for taking that time with me, you know, to kind of center yourself wherever you are. As we get into this discussion today, you know, I think it's important. You know, maybe you have kids in school. Maybe yourself have been a part of what a lot of people call talking circles, healing circles. They have different names, you know, different approaches. But I want to bring in Baba Kweli to not only introduce himself, tell you more about himself, but to tell a little bit of why we did this listening tour and some of the things that we learned from it and things that we already knew, but it was good to see that verification in a good way. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Baba Kweli. Thank you, Baba.
Thank you. Greetings. I'm Kweli Tutashinda. I'm a member of the Brotherhood of Elders Network, as well as the Healing Generations Institute. As Cisco had said, is a collaboration between the National Compadres Network and the Brotherhood of Elders Network. We were sponsored by the California Endowment to do an assessment and landscape analysis of the use and proliferation of healing circles and other modalities amongst school-aged children throughout the state of California. And as you know, California is a large state, but we were able to go to 4 places live and 3 virtual. We went to Sacramento, Fresno, Los Angeles, and of course, Oakland, California. And then the virtual ones were in the Coachella Valley, San Diego, Del Norte, and Humboldt up north. What we were basically assessing was how and when and where healing circles specifically, but other modalities were being used. As we know right now, we're in a period where there's a lot of fear and anxiety amongst our children, you know, because of the policies of the administration, particularly in the immigrant, migrant, and poor communities. And it's a very tenuous situation. It's resembling times that some of us who are older, have experienced in the past. So assessing and administering healing and comfort amongst our children is very important at this time. Whereas the United States ranks high in terms of overall health, it ranks 39th in terms of well-being. California ranks very high in terms of physical health, but it ranks low as well as in well-being and other aspects of healthcare amongst children. Children are often the last ones thought about. So when we went through the state, we asked 4 basic questions. What are your best practices in administering healing circles and other modalities among school-aged children? What is the setting or place where you do this work? How do you evaluate your effectiveness in doing this work? Because that is very important. At the end of the day, they are in school. So we want to see, in some respects, how this healing work helps them not only in their personal life, but as well as in their school life. And lastly, the obstacles in which they're confronted with, whether it's funding or different aspects. And we were able to assess and get a really good idea of this, and we produced a fairly large report as well as some supplementary articles. Dr. Heriberto Escamilla will discuss the survey and the aspects that he covered.
Thank you, Baba Kweli. Thank you. Gracias. My name is Heriberto Escamilla Morales. I'm speaking to you, and I hope when you hear these words, that you're doing well. That they find you in good spirits and in good health. Cisco was talking about the 4 directions. I think of the wind that carries our words, carries these words and brings them back to us. And so, hope you're doing well. I'm just a little bit about me. I'm originally from the state of Nuevo León in northern Mexico. Grew up in Texas, and then I'm speaking to you now from National City, here in Southern California, near San Diego. Been here since '84 with my wife, 3 kids and 5 grandkids. As far as the study, the listening tour, my job, my role was to take care of the survey. I work for the National Compadres Network, and I oversee program evaluation mainly. And what that means is listening to people, collecting information, evidence as it's called today, evidence to show how people see our programs and what they hear, and then how they put what they hear to use, how it helps, and how it might improve. So part of my role is also program improvement. So for this survey, for this particular study, we started out with our network. So we sent a survey out to people that within the National Compadres Network, and we were surprised to bring in, and we threw that net out, and we also brought some people that were not part of the network. So it turned out really well. We collected 152 surveys total. Some of those were outside of California. 142 of those were here in California. Those are the ones that we used in the analysis that you'll see in the report. And some of the findings, that impressed me overall. I was impressed that we were able to do this, and we got very, I think, a reasonably good representation of people that are out there doing circles in the schools, in community centers, some even in their homes or other types of settings. We got a good breakdown of gender, mostly Latino, but we did get other ethnic cultural groups to participate, working in the schools, working in community centers. Again, I would really was impressed with the representation that we got back, which we're able to see, some things that I think are interesting. First and foremost, about half of the people that filled out the surveys told us that they had been trained in La Cultura Cura, and about 17% or so said that they were trained in IIRP. Another group of people, about I think less than 10%, had done both, had been trained in both. And then we had what I thought was surprising: about 25% of people were telling us they were using their own model, something that they had come up with, maybe based on something else, but it was they described it somewhat like their own model. That was surprising to me to see that much people coming up with their own models to do this work. And we can talk more about this later. But that was one of the main things that we saw this. And we saw some of the challenges. They shared with us some of the challenges, some of their accomplishments, and so forth. And we'll talk more about that as we get more into the discussion. Right now, what I want to do is turn this over to Karina, and she'll give you kind of the school perspective. So, con eso.
Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. Buenos dias. My name is Karina Vega, and I am a school counselor representing the beautiful school district, the Coachella Valley Unified School District. I'm also part of the National Compadres Network and also part of HDI. I've been working within the schools and with the National Compadres Network for about 18 years now. Lots and lots of opportunities that we've had to be able to sit in Círculo, not only myself participating in Círculo as an adult, but also with our students. And I do want, for those of you that have followed the podcast and have been listening to us, I did do a podcast last year on my father, and I do want to just recognize that he was promoted to ancestor recently. And a lot of you on the podcast send me a lot of different messages about that podcast and how he always talked about that the sun would always rise tomorrow, right? Mañana va a salir el sol. That was part of the podcast. So I just want to recognize that because I sit here before all of you as a representation, as an extension of him. So I just wanted to highlight that. I also want to highlight the work that we do within the school district. Just recently, actually yesterday, we had 3 graduating classes that went through the whole 12 sessions of Girasol, which is a curriculum with the National Compadres Network. So very excited to see it. All of our ladies were wearing their stalls with their Girasol on their graduation. So it was really amazing to see all of those women that all the work that we're doing has impacted and it will continue to impact. So that was very, very exciting to be able to see that and do that. In terms of the study, there was a lot of things that we talked about just in terms of what was surprising from it, what we knew was happening from it. But more than anything, the disconnect of our students from who they are culturally was very pronounced, is very pronounced when we sit in circle, even just like not knowing who they were named after, or even to, as far as them not knowing where they came from because mom has never talked about dad or vice versa. And just the things that they're able to do when they're sitting in circle, like just finding common ground with someone they might be enemies with. It happens all the time in circles, especially within schools. So there's a lot that we want to share and a lot that we want to talk about as we're moving, through this podcast. So I'm going to go ahead and send it back to Cisco.
Thank you, Karina, for, and for the panel for kind of sharing a little bit about the roles in this, creating this listening tour. I guess before we get going, I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about the makeup of the tour and kind of, how we address some issues. Well, one of the things why the listening tour was important, I think in a lot of ways, is that we wanted to hear from people who've been trained, in other ways of doing circle to see how effective it was, right? How effective it is. We didn't do any surveys of the kids per se. We wanted to know what it was like to implement it, how the school reacted to it. Did the administration support it? What were some of the barriers that happen in schools that make it hard for us to do these type of healing modalities like running circles, talking circles? And also, where was the inspiration for that training? Where did it come from? How was it implemented? All that. And one of the main things is we wanted to learn how was it funded too? How were people sustaining the work of running circles? Because a lot of the people that we talked to, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Beto, is that part of what we saw was that a lot of people, they were from the outside, not necessarily work for the school district. So they came in providing supports for the students. And so they came in as a way of talking to the youth, still based on other programs. It could have been an after-school program, could have been part of discipline, could be a part of a club, different ways. People use circles in different ways. And I think that was important to hear. So I want to ask the panel, what were some of the things before we get into the nitty gritty of the report? I want to know a little bit about the power of the circle. So for me, I just ran a circle today, and a lot of times people don't know that just below the surface, there's a lot of trauma sometimes. And I'm not talking about, all kinds of really bad trauma, just the trauma of everyday life, the anxiety of your job, the anxiety of school, the anxiety. And a lot of people, they want to prepare themselves. They want to go into the circle. But I've seen the power when people start to share, it's like a domino effect. They start to share and they get deeper and deeper, and they hear something that somebody else shared. And then they say, oh, in their mind, they might think, hey, if they could share, maybe I can too. And really what that does is it takes the feelings that we sometimes hide behind, it brings them up to the surface. And I feel that really builds community in a different way than just, going to the same school or being a part of the same organization. It's like you know about each other and you build this relationship through just life, but having these very deep conversations helps you realize you're more alike than you are different in a lot of ways. So for me, that's one of the biggest things that I've seen. And I'm going to ask the panel, you could put this in context of the listening tour or just in observation. So we'll start with Baba Kweli.
Well, one of the things that I've been able to see is that there's now scientific evidence that trauma actually causes short-term and long-term negative health effects. And it's a big word, epigenetics, but they've been able to show that while unlike genetics, which takes generations and generations, epigenetic changes can happen in the short term, and it doesn't have to change the DNA. It changes how the DNA functions. And there've been several studies that have shown, one in Rwanda for the women who experienced genocide. They showed that their children had markers in their DNA that influenced them and made them more susceptible to PTSD and depression. And then there was a study among Syrian mothers and grandmothers that showed that not only their children, but their grandchildren showed markers that showed that they were susceptible to stress-induced changes. This is very significant because along with showing that it affects and causes trauma, this work also shows that it goes both ways and that it's reversible. And another big term, neuroplasticity, just basically means that a lot of the changes are reversible. The human brain and nervous system is very remarkable in that sense. And this kind of speaks to how indigenous practices and ceremonies and healing practices for thousands of years have worked, even though science has been able to proven how it worked. And it's totally opposite of what would you get in a medical or hospital practice. But it shows how these ceremonies and healing circles fall within that realm. And so we now have a certain degree of proof that what we're doing actually can help these children. And I think that goes a long way in convincing administrators, teachers, and parents, because what we found in the survey or the listening sessions that they often were some of the biggest obstacles in terms of their lack of buy-in and being convinced. They were looking at more what is now called evidence-based, which is more hard science. And now we have some other science to go along with that. So I think that this work is very encouraging, and it will help us spread these ideas and hopefully convince administrators, city and public health officials, as well as people who are in the incarceration business, to utilize some of these works. And of course, it's simple, but there's something about when you sit in a circle and you share, it starts a cascade of emotions and hormones that actually set into place a healing effect. And that is some of the basis of the healing circles.
And I want to clarify something. We use the word healing a lot. So I want to make sure, especially in other podcasts, I talked about we talk about the 4 domains of healing, this emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual. There's domains of healing, they call it. And lots of what we're talking about here is how we're processing emotions and stabilizing those emotions so that we can face some of the trauma and kind of acknowledge it and work through it. You know what I mean? We're not saying this is magic or nothing like that. What we mean by healing, it starts the journey. It starts that practice. It's just getting those emotions out, dealing with them in a positive way, helping people, take a look at themselves in many different ways. So I just wanted to make sure that I pointed that out. This is a conversation. This is a living concept too. You know what I mean? But through expressing yourself, you can share a lot of things. So with that, Dr. Escamilla, if you want to share a little bit about, what were some of those practices or things that stood out for you as an evaluator or as a practitioner yourself? You know what I mean?
With regards to the study, first and foremost, what I wanted to say is that it was very exploratory. So we didn't get into a lot of details of what people were doing. We did ask about the model they had been trained in. We asked whether they were in a school or in a what setting they were in, and what kind of challenges they were facing, and so forth. So it was very exploratory. And personally, I'd like to see us continue to explore more, to get more into more depth, and so we have more to say. That's on the survey side of things. On a personal note, I have been involved now in collecting a lot of information and evidence, not just through this study, but other studies as well about circles. And what I've learned, or what I've learned from the research, and Karina, I think can follow up on a practical level. But what I've learned is that, one, that they're used more in the schools and community centers. You see them out there more. And like Cisco said earlier, sometimes they're called healing circles, sometimes they're talking circles, restorative circles. There's different names. What most people will agree on is that what we have in place today are based on indigenous practices. I mean, and it just makes all the sense in the world that people back in the day, I'm talking way back in the day, they sat around a circle and talked and shared, usually around a fire. And that was like the, that was the Netflix of the time, or whatever of the time, that people sat around and they shared their experiences. And if you can picture, just close your eyes for a little while. Imagine living in that kind of world where your only source of heat was fire, and your only source of protection were the people around you. So imagine yourself sitting around in a circle in a fire. You have a sense of safety there because you can see what's coming in front of you, and the people over there can see what's going on behind you, and the people over there, you have a 360, really not you personally, but as a group, as a circle, you have a 360 view of life. So all of us, every single person that is hearing this, and even those that aren't, had ancestors that sat around in that way. We all came from that. All of us. What I've been, learned through my research and participation is a lot of gratitude for the native people of this country, of the Americas, for preserving that way of interacting and relating to each other, face to face, face to face. And when I say circles, I mean circles. I mean, face to face and in person and talking to each other. Because if you do that often enough in that kind of safe setting, eventually, no matter how hard of a person you are, you're going to start sharing from the heart. And that's what I think healing circles are about, is sharing your truth, what you see, what you hear, what you feel, and sharing it with other people. So that's one of the things that I've learned is all of us. It's just a matter of how far back we have to go to remember. Some of us have to go a lot farther back, and some people even today had parents and grandparents that were still speaking an indigenous language and interacting in that kind of way that people do when they're in relationship with one another, and again with that fire, with that earth, with that air, the elements that are around you. That's personally what I mean by indigenous, is that you acknowledge and you nurture those relationships that you have with all forms of life. So powerful, can be a powerful. The last thing I just wanted to say is as we adapt indigenous practices that way, we have to be aware of the fact that we are adapting them. We're no longer, most of us don't do this outside as much. in the elements as much. And so one of my concerns is that as we adapt them, we begin to leave out the very, very critical practices that makes them powerful in the first place. The talking stick, the gratitude, the altar or centering table. There's a number of, I think, very, very critical elements of a circle, that once you take them out, that circle begins to lose some of its effectiveness. So that's kind of some of my observations of not just from the study, but from previous research in the field. So, Karina, did you?
Yes, Dr. Beto, I actually just recently had an experience with a circle where the facilitator said that, she was having a really hard time with people taking turns and, kind of speaking over each other. And you said something really important about the talking piece. She had just like a squishy, like a stress ball, and she was letting the participants toss it, whenever it was their turn to speak. So just kind of speaking to what you were saying, and I told her after the circle, I said, the reason that you're having this issue is because you haven't set the ground rule, the sacred ground rule of how important that talking piece is. So if you're not respecting it, then they haven't understood the importance of the talking piece and understanding it. And she was like blown away, and she's like, this is what, and that they were with a different, I was attending their training, but I did tell her that was something that you have to have those elements, or else you're not respecting the process, right? And that's something that we've really seen within circles. We have 21 schools, so there's 21 facilitators plus co-facilitators. So that means, that the saying "cada cabeza es un mundo," every head is a whole world. Everybody has a different way, a different reality. Perception is reality for everyone, right? Regardless. And so that is something that we have struggled, because people are kind of freestyling, and, I don't really, and the reality is they're not saying this, but the reality is that what they're doing is, I don't feel comfortable with this topic, so I'm going to talk about this. That's something that's triggering my own grief, my own emotion, my own unhealed version of myself. Therefore, I'm going to skip over it, or I'm going to complain about it, or I'm going to resist it. Because the reality is that what's happening is that they're actually triggering something in themselves. And I see it across with all of our social emotional aspects with the school district, not just with healing circles, but I see it everywhere. I'm going to resist that because I haven't started my healing around that. And even if you're on a healing journey, you can still be triggered of things, and then reflecting back and understanding, why did that trigger me? Why was I so upset when Dr. Beto closed the door on me in the lounge, or, whatever it is, because those are all things that are, they're manifesting in a way because they haven't been addressed. And so when we're talking about circles, especially circles within schools, there's a lot of different components to it, because you have different layers of understanding, you have different layers of authority, you have time constraints, you have bells ringing, you have teachers that are upset because their students are in circle and they haven't finished their math assignment. So there's all of these layers that are happening within circles. But the reality is that there's some powerful things happening. I'm going to give you one example. We had 2 students that had fought. They were 6th graders, and they had been fighting since 3rd grades. In fact, I live in the Coachella Valley. I was born in Nuevo León, but I have lived in Mecca, California, Coachella area my entire life. So I have the honor of knowing 4 generations of people. I know people's grandparents, I know their parents, I know, those of us, and then the kids, and then now their kids' kids. So these are kids that have been beefing for generations. Like, not only do they not like each other, but their parents didn't like each other, and their grandparents didn't like each other, and their grandkids are not going to like each other either, right? And so in schools, we're just trying to get them to get along, and we're just trying to get them to stop fighting. And we had these 2 young boys that had been fighting since 3rd grade, like literally since 3rd grade, had been, suspended because of fights. And we sat them in circle, and they both found out that neither one of them had a father. And both of them were very loving and protecting of their mothers. And after that circle, they were never friends, but they respected each other enough to leave each other alone. Like, that was it. That was what happened. And I mean, it was powerful because they didn't know that about each other. They didn't know that they were carrying that baggage with them every single day. And so bringing that out through circle was really helpful for the school because they stopped these boys. And they were, I think that when we're looking at data, their data, they had like 72% suspensions were coming from these two boys. And it was also throwing off, other areas in the database because they were, socioeconomically disadvantaged. They were in special education. Like they had all these things. So it was like really throwing off the numbers for the school. So in terms of data, there really is a lot to say. When you have 50 suspensions and those 50 suspensions are being caused by 3 kids, you really have to see what can you do to support those 3 kids. And what we've been using a lot within our schools is some kind of círculo, joven noble, girasol, some like a restorative practice circle where they're like harm and conflict. So the different variations of circles are appearing within our school district all the time.
Yeah, that's really important, to bring it up. There are many different methodologies. And one thing I learned myself through going through the listening tour was I saw there were people who maybe saw a circle before and just wanted to do something and sitting around and talking and putting little bits of their culture in it, whatever that might be, wherever they're from. They're kind of putting those pieces in there, which is good. I think what we do when we teach circle keeping is that we really want to focus in on the process, because we strongly believe, when I mean I'm talking about NCN, our philosophy around teaching and things like this. We really focus it on, we make things sacred for each other. We have to acknowledge it, try to build that understanding with it, integrate those teachings into our life and make a commitment to do it. And we use the general outline of La Cultura Cura in all our work, be it if it's a teaching circle or whatever, but there are other methodologies, but those elements are important. The main thing is that safe space and the atmosphere. That's really important, building that community. It's also a tool, to get to know each other and build that feeling of familia, of family amongst each other. You know what I mean? And also want to stress, we're not talking about therapy sessions. This is therapeutic, but it's not therapy in that way. You know what I mean? But this brings up a lot. Before we go too far, I want to bring in Baba Kweli to talk about, in your estimation, based on the report, you were the main writer on the report. You really took a lot of the notes when we did these listening sessions. What were some of those challenges, like moving forward? If we go into more schools, what are the things that you feel percolated to the top, that things we need to address? We'll go over the positive elements because there's many positive ones, but let's address some of those challenges, because one of our listeners might be out there saying, oh, I want to do this for our schools and with our schools, or even bring it into your workplace or your programming, maybe even bring it into your family, because you could even have circles with your family if it's hard. And I think every family, it's hard to really talk about, not only the good things, but the bad things that are happening and you have to address as a family. So Baba Kweli, any reflections on that?
Well, while we mentioned funding or lack of funding, as well as lack of parental, administrative, and teacher buy-in were some of the obstacles, I think a key one was many of the places or the practitioners did not have a regular or set place to do their work. The setting shifted from place to place. Without a permanent and fixed place, you're not able to create the degree of energy. It's just like when you walk into a church or a mosque or synagogue or temple or teepee, or in my tradition, a prayer house, immediately you can feel that people have done something in here that was of another place and of the spiritual quality. And it kind of lifts you out of your present sense to do some of that work. And with the schools, they're sometimes noisy and they would go from room to room. And the places, particularly in the Coachella Valley where Karina is, and one other place that had a room, we saw that those places often had the most effective results in administering the healing circles and working with young people, because as soon as they came in there, they knew what the purpose of why they were there. When I was working in Oakland years ago, the Mayor Dellums, and we had a forum 20 years ago, and we asked the kids what they wanted. The one thing that they said they wanted a place, what they called it, a grieving place. And we flipped it in our proposal and we call it a healing center. But as you see in urban communities, when someone is killed, they often have candles on that corner. And that is their way of creating a sacred space. Of course, in those certain settings, that is often dangerous too, because they're out in the open and vulnerable to other amounts of violence. So that's one of the main things that I saw that was needed. If each school or community center could designate a particular room and or area, and as in Karina would probably share, they have what they call a wellness center, where I would gather, there's several rooms and a space for young people to gather. And so soon as they come there, they know, they may be talking or loud or whatever, but I'm sure as soon as they come into this space, their energy shifts and it already kind of creates for them a mood. It's out the whole idea of set and setting for them, and this is something that also harkens back to thousands of years. That fire creates a focal point, as Dr. Beto was saying, in outdoor settings. And since we're not outdoors, we need to kind of keep that inside and have a designated space. So that's the main thing that I would like to share on just what we would need to lift up a little bit more. And then I guess one other aspect is just kind of a returning to your roots thing. One of the more effective programs that we noticed in Del Norte County amongst the native people there was they did a re-indigenization process with their administrators, because they found that many of their own people had strayed so far from their own culture that they were beginning to look at things as if they were somebody else. And so they administered a re-indigenization process to return them to their roots, as well as what they call a young bucks process to introduce their roots more firmly to the young people. And they actually were receiving the best results up there, whereas the white youth who are experiencing a great deal of poverty, and that's why inequity is also a major issue in this whole healing phenomena, because you do see poor people suffering a great deal more. The white youth up there were in the worst shape because they didn't have a cultural foundation or footing, and they were way further away from their indigenous roots and didn't have practices that would help them, So these are some of the areas and things that we saw amongst many other things.
Thank you. I want to highlight some things as we move forward in this discussion. One is, we went to certain sites in person. The Alley one, we went to Oakland, as Baba Kweli explains, we went to Sacramento, and we went to Fresno. And I think one is a lot of people that showed up to those meetings. I want to give props and a shout out to those communities because they showed up. These were some people that we trained many years ago. There were some people that weren't trained at all, but they use circle things and circle practices. There's people that were in foster homes. There was organizations that were more focused in on different aspects of education. Things like that. Then we also had kids that were being mentored by the community in various ways. Some they would take kids out fishing, but they would run circles in that way. There was groups here in LA. There were people who were running circles just in various communities by request only. You know what I mean? So a lot of people I felt had a lot of different experiences with circles, but these central things came up, about having the designated place, about having a place where you can create an ambiance of safety and make them feel safe, to share their most vulnerable stories. And again, it's not having a trauma Olympics. We're not trying to trauma bond. What we're trying to build is the ability to share, as we refer to them as cargas, things that your baggage that you carry. All of us have baggage in some way, shape, or form. but we also want to remind the participants, those ones that are there for the circle, that they have blessings too. So what we're trying to really practice is, how do you look at your life in a balanced way? How do you look at the good, the bad, and what's interesting, and how that connects you to your relatives in the circle? You know what I mean? There's lots of different circles, men's circles, women's circles. There's circles in schools, circles in churches. I just want to remind and keep your mind thinking about that. Maybe you've been in a circle, and I want some comments from the audience. If you shared some of those things, share it with us. Let us know some of those approaches that you utilized in helping the practice come about. So let's get into a little bit more deeper into the evaluation for you, Dr. Escamilla. What were some of the surprising outcomes that you saw, or was none of them surprising for you?
The older you get, the less you're surprised sometimes. It's like there's nothing new under the sun. Sometimes I feel that way, and you have to be careful with that because you can get cynical,
Mm-hmm.
What's different is the different perspectives that people bring, because we're talking about things that we've been talking about for a long time. Culture. We'll just take culture, because we asked in that survey, and we consistently ask in all our work, we ask people, how important is culture to health and well-being? And we ask them, how important is spirituality important to health and well-being, right? Simple questions. We don't define it. And in fact, the differences in scores and means between people is probably an indication that they define culture differently. They see it differently, When you live in a place where you're part of the mainstream culture, you don't even think there's culture. It's like, this is the way things go. This is the way things are done. Everybody knows that, right? And this is how it goes. But when you come from one culture into another, all of a sudden it's the way you talk, the way you walk, everything, it just comes out more. And so that's one of the things that I saw in that question, because I've asked that question, and we recently published a book chapter on this, on the importance that different people give culture. To some people, you say culture and they think about food, they think about music, about how you dress, maybe a particular region, but culture is way, way, more important than that. I did this on my dissertation years ago, so I'm still doing the same work over and over and over, 30, 40 years later. There was two anthropologists. They were a team. They came up with what's now is called a values orientation theory. And basically what they said is culture is a people's solution to existential problems. And to existential being problems of your existence, of your life, right? Critical, important. How do I relate to it, like Kweli just brought up, the place that I'm in. And in our time, we don't think about this very much. But I fully agree with what he was saying. Just being in a place automatically, even though you may not be aware of it. And this is the point of it, because our heads are always full of this or that. We're not paying attention, not really. When you go into a place, there is a definite impact. Different place, your body feels it. Mm-hmm. Your body feels it even if you never become aware of it. So yeah, I want to reemphasize what Baba Kweli was bringing up, the importance moving forward with circles in the schools, really, really, advocating for consistency, a same place, and the youth taking ownership of that place to leave their scent there, and those kinds of, if you set that kind of setting, it adds to the power of the circle. I think moving around from one class to another, or it's a matter, I think, of if you're going to commit to helping kids, and if you're going to, I always did this in all the retreats that I go to, because I always have I'm a scientist by nature. I mean, I started buying microscopes and telescopes when I was 12 years old. I used to go roofing with my dad, and I saved that money and buy that. So I have a very critical mind. I just can't help that. The only way that I can help my critical mind is through prayer. When I'm in prayer, when I'm in ceremony, that is a lot stronger than my mind, so that I'm able to enter into that kind of space and be in that kind of space. And what I'm saying is, if you're going to do these kinds of circles, you have to give it the space and the time for them to work. Doing it 3 or 4 times, and then we're very, very quick, because in evaluation, we're very, very quick to look for outcomes. And I think that's a fundamental problem a lot of times, because you need to pay attention to what they call program fidelity. You need to pay attention to the process and make sure that that's in place before you start looking at outcomes. It takes time. And so I know in this time and age where everything is doing everything for us, and we're in a hurry about everything, it's not conducive to good circles. So, if you don't do that, I mean, you can't be critical of them if you don't give them the time that they need to work. And so, yeah, we saw that as the challenges coming up in the schools about, not enough time, scheduling, and like the funding for this and that. And I always tell people, when I'm a clinical psychologist by training, and so, my first thing with people is, well, okay, let's give this at least 6 times, and then we'll reevaluate, all right? Or 7 times or 8 times, and then we'll reevaluate. But you have to make that commitment to try it out for a while, do the best that you can at it, and then you look for the outcomes, not from the very beginning. So,
thank you, Dr. Escamilla. Karina, what were your thoughts around that?
So I want to agree with both Baba Kweli and Dr. Beto, because the reality is that is a challenge. The space is limited within our schools. The connection that Baba Kweli mentioned is super important. And I think that is actually one of the barriers that we have. So I'm going to tell you a story. We had a student, and he had broken a door at one of our continuation high schools. And so I always tell people I have the bat signal for the district, right? Like they put it up when there's an emergency, right? So I went to support this student, and he's rolling around on the floor, like full grown, 12th grader, rolling around. And I had tried everything. I had tried talking to him. Like I had completely exhausted my bag of tricks, and I didn't know what to do. And I'm like sitting on the floor with this student, and I'm like, mijo, what would your grandma think about the way you're acting right now? And again, like I was like at my wit's end. I didn't know what to do. And he sat up, and he looked at me, and I'm going to say a bad word. He said it in Spanish. He said, "What does that bitch know?" And I looked at him, and I was like, wow, like he's not connected to anything. How am I going to, like, he's only just met me. How am I going to connect with him if he was just like this little floating orb that was bouncing off the walls that wasn't connected to anything? So then we started there. I just started to connect with him, and I just started to tell him who I was and about myself. And then I was able to move him out, and we were able to get him to safety and the whole thing. But that is what Baba Kweli was talking about. That is so essential, because our students are disconnected, and then our adults are disconnected. So we'll have things, like teachers will tell kids like I have a sad story too, bro. Work harder. Nobody cares. Like that disconnection of like, I made it, like I, figured it out, so you can too. Instead of saying, I struggled to make it, I don't want you to have that same struggle. And just really becoming the people that we needed when we were at the place that they were, and helping them understand. And unfortunately, again, because I've lived in the community long enough, I know people whose, last name was Jimenez that now go by Jimenez, and swear they've never spoken Spanish, and, all those things, because they've been disconnected, not because they've wanted to. It's just what has happened. And I sometimes would get frustrated, but I actually had an experience where I didn't know until I lived my first Mujeres retreat with the National Comadres Network. I didn't know that my tata was Otomi. Like that's where he's from Guanajuato. I didn't know. I think I was, at the time when I went to that first retiro that I went to, I think I was like 37, and I had no idea. And I came back and I told him, that I had gone to a sweat lodge and that I had all done these things. And he was very surprised, but in a bad way. And he's like, no, that, sweat lodges are not real. That's where we used to make bread. That, like, he tried to dismiss what it was. And I was so surprised. And so then I was like, wow, I was even disconnected without realizing that I was disconnected. I didn't know that that even existed. And then I started asking questions and I started learning and even just like, asking my mom, like, Mom, why do you have all these hierbas in your garden? And she's like, I don't know, because your grandma did. Like, she didn't even know why. She was just copying and pasting the behavior, but without understanding why. And I wasn't going to copy and paste the behavior because it didn't mean anything to me except a bunch of weeds in a garden at the time, right? And so now that connection has really helped. So within our schools, we have adults, administrators, principals that haven't made that reconnection, so are not understanding the importance or I almost feel like the necessity of doing that, of the reconnection, because they've been able to manage and quote unquote become successful without understanding how disconnected they are and how unhappy they are. And because, again, the word success does not mean healed or does not mean, a lot of other things that they think it's supposed to mean. And just really, really finding within ourselves to start on that healing journey and start to become more regulated adults in order to expect regulation from our students. So that's one of the many layers of issues that we see throughout doing circles within our schools.
Well, you brought up a lot of interesting points to me. I think, having been involved in circles, a lot of times when we do the trainings, even we tell the practitioners, those that are going to run the circles, we use the term circle keeper because they're the ones that hold the space. We push them to understand that you have to believe in what you're doing, right? And it doesn't something you're doing for the students or for the community. You're doing it for yourself too, because the kids will recognize if you're not being authentic and that vulnerability and just being a good listener, nodding, paying attention to what they say, like feeling like heard is a big thing. And at that first, and we refer to that as acknowledgement, the conocimiento, that's so powerful. And a lot of adults can't do that with themselves, let alone kids. You know what I mean? But when I see that light come on in the training, that I know they got that lesson. I know they got that lesson. And the truth is we make things sacred again. You know what I mean? That's the beautiful approach of it. And sometimes understanding that and building that is important. And one of the reflections that I heard a lot in the listening tour, both online and both in person, is I felt like a lot of people felt that this was a genuine way to connect with other people. And they saw that connection. And I think that connection is important. And a lot of people say, well, what does that have to do with schools? Think about in our everyday life. We're disconnected, right? A lot of times people think sharing in a circle is like posting something on Facebook. The problem is a little like button or whatever is not the same as getting feedback and acknowledgement from people within your community. It's different and it is difficult, but it is real connections that we know that really combat depression, combat different things that happen in our communities and our schools and things like that. And we see that, especially with mental health, ever since the pandemic, where mental health is really hard to access these days. They're waiting 6 weeks for a session with a therapist, right? We need to have community ways of at least processing emotions. Again, we're not talking about therapy. We're talking about therapeutic practices. So as we kind of wrap up this episode, I think we might need a part 2, but for right now, let's stick to what we got. And I would say the last question for everyone, what do you think we need to sustain what we're doing and grow the practice of circle keeping? And even within that, how do we grow it in a way that it comes from the people? You know what I mean? Like, what questions can they ask their administrators to advocate for circles if they don't have circles in the schools? And I want to remind folks, in the future, we're going to do a webinar on this, really getting into the details about some of the more research aspects of this, some of the tables that came up, more deliberate. This is more of the feeling and the emotion, which is very important. What we're talking about here. So what would be some of those things that you can suggest, Baba Kweli?
Well, I would suggest a really comprehensive and multifaceted way of training people. And this is some of the things we in HGI have been talking about and have developed, because I think people need to really understand how those 4 aspects of healing that you mentioned interact and are interwoven: mental, spiritual, emotional, and physical. And they need to understand and practice the fact that if you enter one of those portals deeply enough, you affect the other 3. You don't have to necessarily do all 4 at the same time. For instance, if you pray deeply enough, you can have physical healing. I mean, there are people that go by the thousands to Lourdes in France, right? And because of their belief system in this particular place and the water that's there and so forth, they've had miraculous healings occur. If you are physical, just even running, there are monks in Japan called the Marathon Monks of Mount High, and they run 50-mile marathons every day for 100 days in a row for 7 years in a row. After they've done that, they have achieved a certain transformation within their bodies such that when people are touching their garments, they've had miraculous healing. But some of it is because the body produces chemicals in the body, which really are endogenous opiates, really, that get you high, but it creates a euphoria that offers a transformation. And now with the new work on epigenetics, we can possibly see how that possibly works on the cellular level, And then if your mind is strong enough, there's a whole religion. Christian Science believes they don't even go to doctors, and they've had incredible accounts of healing just on that, So each area has to be understood that the body is essentially a self-healing mechanism. What we're doing as circle keepers are facilitating people's healing themselves. We're not necessarily doing the healing. And that's what I think is we have to stress, that we're facilitating their healing that they own by themselves. I'm a chiropractor by training, and we believe that each body has what is called innate intelligence. And that innate intelligence is connected to a universal intelligence. And it's very interesting that right now there's a scientific view that's called the singularity, and is pushed by a major thinker who's quite brilliant, Ray Kurzweil, but is basically saying that at a certain point, artificial intelligence is going to be more intelligent than humans, and that intelligence is going to spread throughout the universe and make the universe conscious. He wrote this in a big book, The Singularity is Near. Well, I countered that book. I wrote a little book called The Singularity is Already Here, and that for 300,000 years, indigenous people has known that the universe has been conscious the whole time, and that we are connected to that. And that's how people can have all of these tremendous transformations. And so even if we don't deal with the metaphysics of it, the emotional part that is expressed in the circles is evident because people feel better after the circle. The proof is kind of in the pudding. And that's why people come back. And so training people in this ancient, but at the same time, new way of thinking about healing, I think would go a long way in proliferating the use of circles and other healing modalities, of course, including movement and dance and prayer amongst our children, and so that it becomes normal and doesn't seem strange. And they don't feel like they have to have a church necessarily to do this, that they have their own connection with their own process of healing.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. That's a good way to operationalize and utilize what we're trying to pass on to to the relatives, as we say, those that are practicing or those that are inspired to. I think it makes you at the end of the day, it helps you communicate. right? Even if you don't realize it, learning how to express yourself and really get out your feelings feels weird at first when you really don't have that experience. But the more you do it, the more you feel comfortable. And also you feel comfortable listening to other people. Sometimes it's painful to hear other people's trauma, but I think if you balance out with the blessings, you could see you start learning from one another about resiliency. And that's important. You know what I mean? And I think that's more important than a workshop on resiliency, because you're talking about it and you're living it with the people with it that you're connected to. Is there anything in that, Dr. Escamilla, that you would like to share?
Yeah. I think if you do an analysis of this podcast, the word connection is probably going to be the most frequently used word.
Yeah.
And just like Kweli was saying, it is about connection. We asked that question also in our pre and post test of people attending our trainings. And it's an open-ended format, so we're not leading them in any way. We ask them, what they're taking away. And that comes up. I felt more connected to the people in the training. I feel more connected to my family. I feel more connected. It just comes up. We asked that question on this survey also. We asked people that are doing circles what they've experienced, what they've learned, what they've taken away from that. And that comes up. I think that's number one. Feel more connected. They say they learn how to listen without explaining. Sometimes when people are talking, we're at the same time thinking about how we're going to respond, or they trigger something and we go off and we're thinking about something else, not really listening to what they're saying. So the Círculo helps people do that. And so it's not all the time that it's not just about going there and sharing your cargas, but it's about going there also and listening to the cargas of others, patiently listening to them. And that in itself, while you may not think it, you think the healing is you talking, but the listening can be very, very healing, as Baba Kweli, was saying there and what he was sharing. The other thing that I would just say, based on this research, this study, it's preliminary. I'd like to do more, but I think just a general recommendation, suggestion is, if you do get trained in something, stay connected. Don't go off on your own. Healing is a journey that lasts a lifetime. So stay connected to people that are also doing the work. Share your observations, your thoughts, and learn from each other. I think, just feeling like you're trained and can go off and do your own thing, I don't think that's a good idea. I think you need to be connected to some sort of community that supports your healing journey and the work that you do.
Yes, thank you.
I just want to add, Dr. Beto said something really important. I think one of the things that our circles have taught me to do is to listen to understand, not listen to respond. Because I think in education, we learn how to listen to respond, because they're going to ask questions. There's going to be a test. There's going to be, all these things. And circles has taught me to listen to understand where people are and why they are. So I think that's really important, what he said. And also, Baba Kweli said something really important, because we at the school district, we get a 3-day training and then we go and run circles. And sometimes that's it. Like they get a 3-day training and then they go and run circles and they never come back to any kind of support, any kind of training, any kind of anything. So that's when that freestyling comes in, or that's when they don't want to do it anymore, because they feel like they've been trauma dumped with all of the kids stuff, and they're not having any support systems that's helping them process whatever they're carrying. So that he said something like a multifaceted training support. I think that should start with us, with ourselves. Like, where are we? And I feel like I went on this journey because I was able to go to the Mujeres Retiro and started wondering and asking questions. And once I knew one thing, I felt like I didn't know anything. So that sent me on my own journey. But it was very directed by my maestros and by my maestras. And so I think that if the training can include some self-discovery options, I think that would be really important for our trainers to be able to stay rooted in the indigenous parts of what we're doing. And then obviously the other thing that we need is money and space. That was something, money and space, because the wellness centers and within our school districts, because of budget cuts and everything else, we're getting hit pretty hard in those centers. Thankfully, we're not losing the centers, but we're losing some of the staff within the centers that were running círculos, like the mentors. That's a big aspect of the Coachella Valley mentors that are also doing work with the National Compadres Network. And then our behavior techs that are supporting within our wellness centers are also getting cut. So that's going to, affect the work that we've been doing for a long time. So, and space, because our schools are growing, and the easiest people to kick out are the people doing círculos, because they're not mandated by the state, and, math and English take priority within our schools. Unfortunately, and I say unfortunately because I'm a big, big, big advocate. Everybody knows it's my soapbox. If we focus on the SEL, we're going to get better results. We do it backwards. We wait until we have bad results and then try to go focus on the SEL parts. And I'm like, I grew up on a ranch where farmers, our dirt has to be ready to plant RCU. A teacher can create the best lesson in the world. If that student is not ready to learn, there's no point. And the way they become ready to learn is through social emotional learning, and everything that we do through La Cultura Cura and HGI and circles and all of that. So those are just a few things that we need.
Well, I want to appreciate everyone for their time. And like I said, we're going to do another webinar at some point, a webinar probably live on Facebook or something like that, where we can, again, share some practical things about the survey that we did, and also kind of get into some of the findings more in detail. We'll also make that available on our website. On the particular website, we have the National Compadres Network.org. We have an HGI section that we can post it there. You could read it, give feedback. We want people to utilize the tool, read it. If you want to bring it to your school, it might help inform decision makers, which is important. Again, the survey that we conducted, listening tours we conducted, we did tap into a large part of our networks. But we also got people just from the community who just heard about it, wanted to be there. And from that, we've connected with them, which is beautiful. And I think one of the turning points after this, or one thing we're going to, is how do we share this in a way that makes it more accessible? And we could create this conversation of how do we make sustainable efforts to bring this type of healing to schools. And part of that is, we did talk a lot about, we didn't mention it a lot, but we did talk about the idea of Medi-Cal and how to bill and what that process is. And if people are afraid of that, or what's the roadblocks to that, but that's like a moving target right now with all the changes on the federal level. But, we're all looking at it in various ways, so I want to, again, thank our listeners for, caring about healing, really learning what healing means, not only for you and your life and your family, your kids, things that you've been through, but how that, we say this a lot, heal people. And so this is something that happens in our life through various ebbs and flows of life, and we learn each time. And by us sharing that, we make somebody else's journey a little bit easier for them. You know what I mean? And I know a lot of my mentors and elders in my own life had shared things that they overcame in circles or in ceremonies and things like that really helped me in my life. Some of them, I shared it with them, but I don't think they really know how they affected my life. And that, we've talked about this a lot, but it is that connection that we share. You know what I mean? We share those very intimate moments. When you're being vulnerable, that's intimate. And that a lot of our human nature craves that in a good way. And sometimes we in schools, we feel like a number. You know what I mean? It's triggering, or it can be. So with that, I was going to go around one more time. If there's any last thing you want to share, out there to people, inspiring circle keepers, what's one lesson that you would share with them? Something brief, but something you feel is important. I'll go ahead we'll mix it up this time. We'll start with Karina first.
I think more than anything, the idea of starting your own journey. You might think that you're on the journey. You might think that you've started, but it's so surprising to me every time that somebody says that they're on a healing journey, but then they're triggered by something, and then they don't understand why they're feeling that way, and not understanding that it's something that they haven't addressed or they haven't healed. So starting their own personal journey, making sure that they have mentors that they can go to that, have been, there's a lot of different things, right? But I always tell people, if you don't want their life, if you don't want their income, or if you don't want their marriage, don't take it, don't take their advice too seriously. Like really, because a lot of people have a lot of things to say, but is that really what you want to model your life after? Model, teach, acknowledge is what I always tell kids. The first thing they have to do is model the practice, then teach the practice, then acknowledge that it's happening. So starting that healing journey, finding mentors that are really going to, I always talk it like mirror. Like I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to give you the answer. I'm not going to tell you what's right or wrong, but I'm going to put that mirror in front of you so that you can self-reflect and you can do the work itself. And sometimes that's hard because we are so used to looking for people to validate us. We go on Facebook, we're looking for likes, we're looking for comments, we're looking for all these things. But the reality is that only the people that really love you are going to be honest and tell you, this is what you're saying, this is what you're doing, this is what, is that really what you're trying to do? And really find people that are going to support you. Make sure that you're on your own healing journey. And then also find some kind of spiritual outlet, whatever it is, whether it's church, prayer, whatever it is. But that, for me, that is foundational. And if you don't have that, I really, really highly suggest that it's something that you start with.
Thank you. Baba Kweli.
I would just say, tell all the people in your life, particularly the children, your children, grandchildren, all your loved ones, that you actually love them, and tell them that in a heartfelt and sincere way all the time.
Oh, that's good. Thank you. Dr. Escamilla?
Yes, the spiritual foundation. I didn't know what I was going to say. I was trying to figure out, but then Karina reminded me. I tell people that all the time. This is my recommendation. I'm not saying it has to be this way. It should be done this way. It's not like that at all. It's just that from my own life experience, and everybody's different. Cada cabeza es un mundo. That's absolutely true. But I have found it most helpful to have spiritual practice. I hear a lot about, and I used to do this myself. I'm not saying I'm perfect or anything, but it's not what you believe. It's what you practice. It's what you do. It's what you practice. That's what makes life, not what you believe. Our beliefs, our intentions, get out of me. Your intentions are fine, but human beings are the most unnatural of all the life forms here on Earth. Every other animal or plant, they know what to do. They know what to do and they do it. And we as human beings, we struggle. So the Círculo is a good place to orient yourself, come back to the center. And so it's your practice. Find time in the day, not to think or reflect, but simply connect with plants, the ground, the air, the water. Just connect. Can't say anymore.
Well, again, thank you. I mean, man, we covered a lot, and hours with the time is not enough to get through all this detail and the comprehensive approaches that we took. Even though it was a first step, we learned a lot, traveling to other communities, learning with people, and I want to, remind folks, when we did this listening tour, we started with the circle and we ended with the circle. We kept it as the primary focus. It's probably not traditional research in that way, but, we are not just traditional evaluators or things like that. We care about this community and we care about the practice and the development of the practice. I want to thank everybody again. Remind folks, again, wherever you listen to your podcast, be it, Spotify, Amazon, Apple Music, wherever you listen, I want you to, do us a favor, give us some feedback there, a review. They call it different things on each of the formats that play it, but whatever format you use, it helps other people find this discussions and discussions like it, and we support other podcasts as well, not just ours in that way. So, until we come back to each other again and have these conversations, I want to remind you that the circle doesn't end, that the ripples go outward. You know, a lot of times people talk about the ripples of harm. Well, there's ripples of healing too. And we're talking about those ripples of healing, you know. And may these words, you know, be the seed that we're planting for you, for your community, you know, for your family, however it is. And really it's about healing your communities. And I want you to stay rooted, stay connected, and remember, la cultura cura. And that means create that healing culture for ourselves and for our community. With that, palabra.
Ashe.
Palabra.
Palabra.
For more information about Healing Generations and the Healing Generations Institute, visit nationalcompadresnetwork.org and be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with our new releases.